Everyone agrees that the United States of America is the preeminent global superpower. And being the world's preeminent superpower, capable of projecting overwhelming military force to pretty much any spot on the globe in a matter of hours, does have its advantages. You know, minor things like everybody wanting to be your friend, you getting extremely favorable trade deals, basically being able to force cooperation out of anyone for anything that you want. You're essentially above international law if you so choose, which the US has. There's a reason why the United States spends billions and trillions of dollars on maintaining military bases all over the world. They're essential to its global dominance. And this is especially true for the realm of intelligence. In a time known as the information age, knowledge is power is a statement that is truer than ever. But conversely, power is also knowledge, and the ability for US intelligence to do what it does hinges directly upon its military dominance. You really think the NSA would have gotten away with tapping the phones of state leaders of countries that they were officially and still are officially allied with if they didn't have a huge gun to their head also? You think if Germany was tapping Trump's phone, the US would just sort of let that slide the way Germany did it the other way around? You think Australia would be pissing off China all the time by providing strategic support to US operations in Asia and hosting literal fucking Pine Gap if the US wasn't the #1 global dominant naval power? The answer is no, obviously. These are rhetorical questions, that's how they work. For the US, a lot hinges on continuing to be the globally dominant military power. And in China and Russia, there are two very powerful contenders for the throne. And aside from their development, there's also a massive geostrategic shift in landscape that is about to occur, which is a massive threat to the USA. Welcome to the Arctic. As everybody knows, the Arctic is where the North Pole is. It's completely frozen for most of the year, and even the few months where it becomes a region that is navigable for ships, it can be precarious. Not really something you want to rely on to connect industrialized nations via shipping. Thing is, climate change is making the Arctic ice recede further and further each year, keeping the passages open longer each year, and creating new passages altogether. This, combined with modern technology, is making the Arctic a hot contender for hosting the most important shipping routes in the world. Currently, East Asia has to trade with Europe and the American East Coast through the Panama and Suez Canals respectively. And as you can see, these are not super fast routes. And wouldn't it be nice if you could connect 80% of the world's industrialized nations with much shorter routes going through the Arctic? Well, that's exactly what the future holds. Thanks to climate change, Arctic trade routes will be cheaper on fuel, time, and carbon emissions. Cheap Asian manufacturing would have unprecedented access to high-demand regions that have extremely high buying power in Europe and the American East Coast. Conversely, the growing upper and middle classes in Asia will have a lot cheaper access to high-end and luxury goods manufactured in Europe and the American East. Currently, global naval trade, which is the most important kind of trade, is de facto controlled by the United States. Sure, they don't really have sovereignty over any of the strategic choke points, but their warships just sort of hang out, and they could, if they wanted to, just blast all of the trade ships that they don't like out of existence. That may be against international law, but the US really does not give a shit about international law. The fact that this is possible is a huge factor. I mean, it really shouldn't be too difficult to understand why exerting influence over all of the world's most important shipping routes is a huge advantage. But if suddenly most of the world's important shipping routes shift to the Arctic for most of the year, if not all of the year at a certain point, the US gets problems. So you might be thinking to yourself, hey, why doesn't the US just send its warships up there and then control the Arctic trade? I mean, it does have a lot of warships. Well, my friends, it's not quite that simple. There's already a guy up there in the Arctic, and he has a lot of cheeky-breeky. There are three main passages through the Arctic. You have the Northwest Passage, the Northeast Passage, and the Transpolar Passage. The route through the Northwest Passage is 40% shorter than through the Panama Canal and lies within Canadian waters. Most nations with Arctic interests dispute this and want the area declared international waters, and currently it looks like Canada will budge on that, choosing to benefit from trade passing through the region via ports instead of risking an armed standoff. The Northeast Passage provides even more savings, being over 50% cheaper than the Suez Canal, which it would replace. Thing is, it runs entirely through Russian waters, and Russia knows this. Putin has been investing massively in infrastructure up there to support an extensive trade network. Then you have the Transpolar Passage, which would likely be open the shortest amount of time of the year, but which does have the benefit of being located entirely in international waters. However, Russia and Denmark are both trying to contest that, and even if it remains classified as international waters by the United Nations, and that is respected, which is also a factor that may or may not be true, Russia will just do the same thing the US does with strategic trade routes today, and just sort of have its warships hang out there. And before you Americans decide to invade Canada so you can have more territorial claims in the Arctic beyond Alaska, that's not the only reason you are wholly unprepared to deal with Putin in the cold lands. Russia has been doing military exercises up there for years. Russian soldiers are trained for Arctic operations. Russian equipment is calibrated for Arctic operations. They are a lot better at operating in that specific area than any other nation. They are rebuilding old Soviet bases and building entirely new bases at strategic positions. For Putin, militarizing the Arctic and making it ready for Russian-controlled global trade has been a priority for many years, because he can see the opportunity that is about to fall into his country's lap. Because it's not just trade that he could potentially exert massive amounts of influence over. It is estimated that the Arctic holds about 13% of the world's oil and 30% of the world's natural gas. That's a lot of oil and natural gas. You also have gold, iron, and diamond deposits up there aplenty, but ironically, resource extraction isn't as sure a deal as trade. Depending on how energy technology develops, with more renewables, nuclear energy, potentially fusion, and the increased popularity of EVs, it might be a bit too expensive to drill for those resources up there because it requires energy prices to be high. And as for minerals, it is possible that at the point where we can actually do large-scale mineral extraction in the Arctic, which is projected to be about the middle of the century, we will also be doing early-stage asteroid mining. However, if we are doing asteroid mining by that point, the actual material profits will still take a while to come back to Earth on account of them being just really fucking far away. And so at least the easier to tap deposits in the Arctic will definitely be tapped. Burger, talk more about America, you fucking cocksucker. Well, here's the thing. America is not even prepared to get a foot in the door in the Arctic. Forget about the fact that your troops are not trained to fight in the Arctic, your equipment is not designed to be operated in the Arctic, and your infrastructure up there is lacking at best. The one thing that you need to be good at doing anything in the Arctic is icebreakers. You need them to escort trade ships and maximizing the time that you can do stuff in the Arctic. You need them for the same reason for military operations. Icebreakers are the one thing that is always required to do stuff in the Arctic because they provide mobility. If you want to compare them in terms of strategic importance, compare them to aircraft carriers. At this point in time, Russia has around 40 icebreakers and will have around 50 by the end of the next decade. The US has 7, and only 2 of those are owned by the Coast Guard. Most of the others are science vessels. The US Navy does not have any icebreakers at all. I mean, come on, even Canada has 15 icebreakers. And you will never be able to catch up to Russia's numbers. It is simply impossible. Not only are icebreakers massively expensive to build, they take around 10 years for a single one to be built. And very few shipyards in the world have the technical know-how to build icebreakers. And guess whose icebreakers most of those shipyards are currently building? not America's. Even if the United States somehow managed to clog up all of the possible icebreaker orders around the world tomorrow, it would never even come close to Russia's icebreaking fleet. This means that Russia would still dominate the Arctic most months out of the year because it can simply move more material. The United States doesn't even have an Arctic strategy. There is nothing in place, not even any concrete plans to sort of maybe build radar infrastructure up there, or train soldiers, or maybe buy equipment that is actually optimized for operating in the Arctic. There is nothing, absolutely nothing, to deal with this imminently upcoming shift in geopolitics. And why is this? Well, it's because America doesn't believe in climate change. I'm not even joking, that is the literal reason why this is the case. Agencies who want to prepare Arctic strategies to make America future-proof can't do so because American politicians are still fighting over whether or not climate change is even happening. And so if you spend taxpayer funds on devising strategies to deal with problems in the Arctic, or preparing to deal with problems in the Arctic, you will immediately get into the crosshairs. A lack of action regarding the Arctic was a criticism of the Obama administration. They just sort of pushed that off into whoever the next president was going to be. And well, the Trump administration is headed by a literal climate change denier. And it also has the cock of climate change denying lobbies very far up its arse. Even if you're one of those factually incorrect people who believes that climate change is happening, but it's not happening because of humans, it doesn't change the fact that you should be worried about this, because this is still a situation that will alter the geopolitical landscape in a way that will massively threaten US hegemony. Hegemony upon which the United States depends. So ironically, the United States should be the country that is loudest in the fight against climate change, because it probably has the most to lose. But hey, we live in best timeline. Just sort of sit back and enjoy the show and get ready to drink a lot of vodka in the future. Thank you very much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, share this video to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or buying some of my ultra cool, fancy, high quality, state-of-the-art merchandise. And in that spirit, really just consider the irony and the strangeness of this whole situation with regards to the United States. How the country that is always being portrayed as stupid will actually be destroyed by its own stupidity. And that is very sad. And see you around, cunts.